I have two goals when making this lush cave village concept build. One, it has to look as vanilla as possible. This should look like something Mojang could theoretically add to the game. Number two, it has to actually be functional as a village, and I'll bring in villagers at the end of the video to test if I've done that well. This seed is totally random. I haven't cherry-picked this lush cave. I wanted to create the most natural conditions possible. I'm starting with the town center, which I'm constructing out of deep slate bricks, which should fit in nicely with the deep slate around us. Aha! We've got a little friend spawning in here. This illustrates my point perfectly. I was constructing the town center to be a fountain so that our little axolotl friends could actually spawn in here, since they're like the key feature of the lush cave. And looks like it's already working. So that's fantastic. Village town centers always have a bell, and that is for the interaction with raids. Here in this well is where we're going to put ours. And instead of path blocks, we're actually going to use oak planks, seeing as how there's no actual dirt grass blocks here to turn into path blocks. And after just a couple potted azaleas, I think we can call that a town center. Now it's time to add the paths. And as I explained in my mangrove village video, paths always emanate around from the town center in the four cardinal directions, meaning east, north, south, west. So we're going to extend our oak platform here, and to be honest, the paths were most of the reason why I wanted to make this lush cave village in the first place, because as you can see here by the mineshafts, in 1.18 they added new generation for them, so if they are closer to the ground than the ceiling, they will be supported by oak logs, and first if they're closer to the ceiling than the floor, they'll be supported by chains and fences. So we can just straight up use that generation for our village here. Hey, look at that, diamonds. So I'm just throwing in some random shapes here. I try not to get too particular about it because the game will just generate branches randomly, so it's good to just not think about it too much. However, this pillar is right in front of the north direction path. So as you can see by what I've done here, in normal villages, the paths will just cut right through the landscape because there's air blocks above them in the actual structure. So we're going to do that here, but I think it'll be interesting just cutting straight through this pillar. I was right. That looks really cool. So starting at the ends, every 4 blocks is going to have supports connected to it. And I have to figure out at every junction of 4 blocks if it's closer to the ceiling or the floor. And actually, now that I've run into this problem, I think we can use the regular mineshaft walls and ceiling like support structure here for when the path actually goes into a bunch of solid blocks. Okay, I think you'll agree that this looks fantastic now. I've put in the supports. Logs on the bottom, chains on the top. Over here, there's not really much because it's all contacting with the ground. And then over here, we have just a few. But then over here, we ran into this natural mine shaft, which just so happened to be here. And the chains from this one actually hang off of the real mine shaft. And I think that is just the icing on the cake right there. And also over here, we've expanded into the earth just a little bit. I don't want to do too much of this, but it's good to have an example of what it might look like if it were to actually naturally generate that way, which it totally could. From here on out, I'll be building in super flat, and then I'll paste these buildings into our actual lush cave world once they're complete. The first thing we have to do is build up a little island of deep slate, moss, and clay, lush cave ground blocks. And this is because if a village building isn't actually on solid ground, in Mojang's villages, they will have this island of dirt underneath them, and that serves to make it a little bit less weird that they're just sort of floating midair. So we're going to employ the same concept here, only with stone instead of dirt. Part of keeping things vanilla is using local materials. Even if a block would fit nicely here, if the villagers couldn't find it in their surrounding area, then Mojang wouldn't include it. And you can see this evidenced in their other builds. Let's start out with the basic house. I imagine that wood would actually be a fairly valuable resource for these villagers, so I'm going to use that sparingly. And actually, even this is too big. The default villager houses in Minecraft are exceedingly small. They only have this 3x3 on the inside, so we're gonna have to get tiny. Now for our roof, I'm gonna use deep slate tile, again using wood sparingly, seeing as how there's not very much of it underground. And I'm going to just have a very, very low pitched roof, because you don't really have to worry about lots of snow or rain or any sort of heavy debris on your roof underground. You have the roof of the cave to protect you from all of that. But you might want a roof just to keep the spore blossom spores out, the bats, and probably the spiders, you know, don't want a spider in your house. Okay. I'm liking that shape. It's a little bit more rounded than the other village houses, and I dig that. Let's throw some glass in the windows and throw in an interior. Okay, I'm liking this shape. It's a little bit more rounded than the other village houses, and there we go. Easy peasy. So I've just had a thought. Wood might be in short supply, but terracotta would not be because of all the clay. So I'm thinking we can use purple or magenta terracotta as an accent block in a lot of builds. I think let's go with purple. And I've created a slightly bigger house. And with that, the basic house are done. Let's move on to the professions. So I thought we'd start with the fisherman, which I think is going to be a very important profession for our villagers here. There's not too much light underground to grow crops by, so I imagine fish is going to be a large portion of their food source. We can bring in this little wooden fishing dock here, similar to how the other villages have at the entrance to their fishermen's. Okay, I think this is looking actually pretty good. All that's left to do now is spam barrels. Mojang likes to put a verifiable ton of these. What I'm building now is the temple, and I am actually including wood in this one for two reasons. One being that it's an important building, and thusly would have more expensive materials to go into it, and also because we're going to have bookshelves in here, and that'll just look nicer palette-wise. And let's go in and add those bookshelves now. I'm a dum-dum. Dum-dum! For some reason, I was confusing the library and the temple into one building. This is the temple where the cleric goes, and in a separate building is the library where the bookshelves go. And I think this type of interior will work well. Clerics are never really very complicated. It's usually just a brewing stand on the floor. And this is the library where the librarians with the lectern go. And here it is all complete. I shortened it a little bit, and we now have space for two librarians. Here we have the stonemason, also very important for our village, made mostly out of deep slate. Inside we have some clay with the purple terracotta and the stone cutter, obviously, just to show that the mason is actually the one turning all this clay into terracotta for the other houses. This is the armor smith. I went with something simple, like an outdoorsy type of stand here. Almost no wood because of the fire hazard. And this is the other smith, the weaponsmith, with the little grindstone and the lava there. And these are the ones that usually have the chests. So I put two actually in this one, because I figure that this is probably going to be the rarest village there is, generating underground. So I'd figured the player would deserve a little bit more loot just for finding this. And it now occurs to me, having built all of these, that we might have made a slight mistake. I put these stone and clay and moss islands underneath them to mimic what other villages do, but that still might not work because these could generate at the end of a floating path, and then you would just have this floating rock island, which doesn't really make sense. So what I think we can do is we can make variants for every single building, one with the stone island and one with a oak platform, like how we did our paths. Then the theoretical algorithm that would place these buildings would decide if it was suitable to put the island or the hanging platform if there was no solid blocks underneath it, like so. And I honestly think this looks pretty good, just like that. Maybe I should have done that way from the start. But anyway, the fisherman's hut is going to be a bit weird because I have to include the water somehow, so I don't know. I'll come back to you when I figured that one out. Well, here's what I came up with. I just went for the simplest solution and turned everything into wood. And honestly, I think it looks fine. It looks very mojang-y. I could totally see them just making a pond out of wood. And also, all of them are done. So now it's time for the farms, and then we can get to actually putting these back in the world. And here they are. I've tried to go as simple as I possibly could. It's just the plains farm with deep slate instead of oak logs. And we have the oak platform for the hanging one and the lush cave ground for the non-hanging one, and just some wheat and potatoes growing in there. I put 2 composters per farm because I feel like these would be less common than in the other villages because of the lack of light in caves. So I wanted to really like make these economical. Now that that's all done, let's get importing. We actually have a village now, and it's not quite done. We still need to add the lights and the accessories, but you can see now what it's pretty much going to look like when it's done. We've got the buildings all in place here, and I'm really glad I decided to do the oak platforms and the stone islands. Honestly, that was good I thought of that, because if I didn't, this would have not looked well. We've got all of our villager professions in place. Here we've got the smith, and I figured that since this is an underground village, we needed to include air blocks in the actual structure. And I just did this by hand, but if I was going to actually make this a structure with structure blocks, I would include a rounded off bubble of air above the house so that our villagers don't get smothered. And it made this really cool effect where you have this like little grotto for the houses that generate underground. And sometimes in caves you run into weirdness with water and lava and stuff like that. So I just decided to leave this one as an illustration of the concept, how, you know, you can get weird stuff like this sometimes, but it's okay. I kind of like this waterfall smith house. But I think my favorite of the underground buildings is the fisherman's hut, and I feel like this grotto here under the earth works really well with this pool. I like it. It's like a cave fishing. As you can see, I've brought in supports as we did with the paths, and I've, you know, once again done the closer to the ceiling, closer to the ground thing. We had some mishaps with the fire there, which I'm actually glad that this didn't spread all the way up. That's a good proof of concept for if lava happened to flow over our village. Here we've got the church, supported with chains, and on the other side we've got this wooden farmland piece supported by chains next to the library, which somehow got vines in it. I'm leaving that though, that looks nice. And yeah, another nice little house here. All right, let's add some decorations. For our lights, I think I'll go with just a simple lantern on a fence post. No need for anything too complicated. And the last one right here, there we go. That's looking a whole lot brighter now. So for our first decoration, I had the idea that we could have a sort of tutorial for the player. Mojang likes to do this a lot. So the concept of bone mealing an azalea is known. Everyone knows this, but if you weren't told on the internet, you might not know. So I figured that we could do something like this, and this can be a little decoration and also just a mini tutorial for the player to understand that this flowering azalea here could actually be bone mealed and turned into a tree. And then I thought we could have something similar to the taiga villages with the iron armor stands. And my reasoning behind this is because underground there's no shortage of iron. See, there's right there. So these villagers would have access to enough iron to make extra sets of armor. And for our last decoration here, I did this nice simple little planter with some drip leaves and a spore blossom. Okay, everything is done. The only thing left to do is to test and see if this actually works as a village. There you go, villagers. I'm seeing green particles. I'm not sure what that means. Oh, this guy's stuck on an azalea. He'll figure it out. I'm looking to see if any of them find a profession and a bed to sleep in. Wow, they really cannot handle this azalea, huh? Okay, we've got a sleeper, so that's working. Aha! We've got a farmer. Okay, nice. That's one. And there we go. There's a weaponsmith. Alright, it took him a second, but now they got it. Although, they have the plains outfit, which is interesting. Since we're actually underneath a jungle right now, I expected them to have the jungle texture. Where are you going, dude? See, this is kind of what I was afraid of, that they would just pathfind to nowhere, get lost, and die. Yeah, like, look, he's just wandering into a dark cave. And so is this guy. Well, it's not like they don't do that in the overworld, so I say mission success. Lush Cave Village complete. We've got this guy going straight for the cleric. Yes, we now have a cleric. And I saw... Yes, okay, 2 fishermen. That's to be expected. Oh, yeah, okay, here's where all the villagers went. They all became fishermen. Yeah, that's on par with Mojang. I will leave a link in the description to a world download if you'd like to explore this place for yourself. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.